We are going to find exact values today of trig ratios for specific reference angles. So we've learned how to use our calculator to plug in like sine of 35 degrees or cosine of 60 degrees, and we get a decimal. There are times when we use specific reference angles that we want to get exact values, meaning we don't want to have to round the answer. And these are very common trig ratios that go back to using 30, 60, 90 triangles and 45, 45, 90 triangles. So all of these values on this exact value table are derived from 45, 45, 90 triangles and 30, 60, 90 triangles. So we use these values for reference angles: 45 degrees, 60 degrees, 30 degrees. So when I look at these angles are in radians here. Up above here, I'm going to write these in degrees. So pi over 6 is the same thing as 30 degrees. Pi over 4 is 45 degrees. Pi over 3 is 60 degrees. Pi over 2 is 90 degrees. Pi is 180 degrees. 3 pi over 2 is 270 degrees. And 0 is 0 degrees. And so we're going to think about if I wanted to know the sine of 30 degrees, I would use this chart. And I would say sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. I could also say, well, what's the tangent of 45 degrees? I can use this chart, and I see the tangent of 45 degrees is 1. So we use these reference angles, which are these quadrant 1 angles. And these quadrant 1 angles will help us find the sine, cosine, tangent of any angle that has a reference angle of 0, 30, 45, 60. The other thing that we want to keep in mind, there's things that we have to decide. When I give you an angle and you need to find the exact value, the first thing you want to do is find out what quadrant the angle lies in. This helps us know what trig ratios are positive and negative. So in the first quadrant, all sine, cosine, tangent are positive. In the second quadrant, only sine is positive. In the third quadrant, only tan is positive. And in the fourth quadrant, only cosine is positive. So we use this kind of acronym. All students take chemistry, ASTC, to help us remember. All of them are positive. Students starts with an S, so only sine. Take starts with a T, so only tan. Chemistry starts with a C, so only cosine. Then we have to decide what the reference angle is. So first we're deciding where is the angle, what is the reference angle, and then we use the chart to find our exact value. So for example, tangent of 30 degrees. What quadrant does 30 degrees lie in? So if I think of 30 degrees lies in the first quadrant. So it's in quadrant 1. What is the reference angle? Well, 30 degrees, since it's in the first quadrant, this is my angle, and this is also my reference angle. So my reference angle is equal to 30 degrees. Is it positive or negative? When we're in the first quadrant, it's going to be positive. So I go to my chart, and I remember this is 0, 30, 45, 60, 90, 180, and 270. I go to my chart. I want to know the tangent of 30 degrees. So my answer is going to be radical 3 over 3. Let's try another one. Sine of 240. So now I'm going to think, which quadrant is 240 in? So if I label my quadrants or my axes 0, 90, 180, 270, 240 is going to be in the third quadrant. So this is going to start here. It's going to open up, and this is going to be 240. So I'm in quadrant 3. What is my reference angle? My reference angle is in here. So my reference angle is going to be 240 minus 180. And so we get 60 degrees. So I know if I look at this, this is 30, 45, 60. I'm going to be working in that column. So my reference angle is 60 degrees. Is the ratio positive or negative? So we're trying to find the sign in the third quadrant. So I'm looking here. That's quadrant 3. Sine is negative here. So tan is the only positive, sine is negative. So I am negative in the third quadrant. So now I need to find my exact value. So sine of 240, I'm going to use a reference angle of 60 degrees. Okay, so I go down here and I'm trying to find sine. So sine of 60 degrees is radical 3 over 2. But I'm negative, so I'm going to be negative radical 3 over 2. And that's my answer. So I need to decide what quadrant is the angle in, what's the reference angle, and is it positive or negative? Then I can use my chart. Let's look at the negative, negative 225. So if I look at negative 225, I start at 0. I go to negative 90, negative 180, negative 270, negative 360. So I'm opening in the negative direction. So if I start here, I'm going to open and I'm going to be in the third quadrant. So this is negative 225. So what quadrant am I in? I'm sorry, that's the second quadrant. I'm in quadrant 2. What's my reference angle? My reference angle will be back to the nearest x-axis. So this is my reference angle. So my reference angle is going to be negative 225 plus 180. Actually, we want to think of what is that distance. So I'm going to do negative 180 minus a negative 225. So that's going to give me 45 degrees. So my reference angle is 45 degrees. That tells me which column I want to work in. So I'm going to be looking at this column. This column is 45 degrees. This is 30 degrees. This is 60 degrees. 90, 180, 270. And is my trig ratio positive or negative? So I'm looking for cosine in quadrant 2. So I look here. The only thing that's positive in quadrant 2 is sine. So cosine is negative in quadrant 2. So I'm going to be negative. So I look at my chart. I'm looking at cosine of 45 degrees is radical 2 over 2, but it has to be negative. So it's going to be negative radical 2 over 2. So I'm basically just using the chart for these. Do one more. Sine of 330. 330, what quadrant is that going to be in? I'm going to start on my initial side. I'm going to open up, and I am going to be in the fourth quadrant. This is 0, 90, 180, 270, 360. So what quadrant is the angle in? It's in quadrant 4. What is the reference angle? My reference angle is going to lie in here. So the difference between 360 and 330 gives me 30 degrees. So I know that I am here. I'm in this column. This is 30, 45, 60. Is it positive or negative? So when I'm looking in the quadrant 4, I'm down here. The only one that is positive is cosine. So sine is negative in the 4th quadrant. So we say negative. So now I'm looking for sine of 330. I use the reference angle of 30 degrees. And I know that I have a negative 1/2. Oops, this should say tan. I don't know what, oh, tan of 180. So we want to look at where 180 is. If I look at where 180 is, 180 has an initial side here, it opens all the way up, and it goes over here. So these are special points because we don't have a reference angle and we're not lying in a quadrant. So we don't answer these questions. What we want to look at is we have specific points when we deal with these. So tangent of 180. Let's look up here. Here's 180. Here's tangent. So tangent of 180 is equal to 0. We don't need a positive or a negative. The reason why we have specific points that lie on this unit circle. This is the point 1, 0. This is the point 0, 1. This is the point negative 1, 0. And this is the point 0, negative 1. So this is my x and y. And so when we think of tangent of x, or tangent of 180 is going to be equal to what we learned yesterday as y over x. Y is 0, x is negative 1, so it ends up being 0. You can just use your chart here, but you don't have to worry about positive and negative for this. It's just going to be 180 is equal to, tangent of 180 is equal to 0.